Perfect. So, warm welcome to the Merge Online Science Policy Dialogue titled Towards a Prosperous Europe, Shaping Policies for Sustainable and Inclusive Wellbeing. Before spending this 1.5 hours on this really important topic, it would be really nice to know who is in this room. So feel free to briefly introduce yourself in the chat. Where you're from, what are you working on, and what made you join this discussion. My name is Ella Välimäki. I'm from Demos Helsinki, and I'm a part of the Merge consortium. Merge is a Horizon Europe funded project which aims to integrate well-being, inclusion, and sustainability indicators into governance policies at EU, national, and local levels. Sustainable and inclusive well-being has been at the core of our work, but since we started, the world has changed quite a lot. So more than once, we have to ask this question: what does a prosperous Europe look like? What kind of future do we want to live in, and how to get there? And today, we want to expand this discussion to all of you as well, whether you are a policy expert, policy practitioner, researcher, civil society actor, student, or just an enthusiastic individual who wants to contribute to a better future in Europe. So we'd love to hear your thoughts, concerns, ideas, arguments in the open discussion we have later on. So today we have really great and diverse group of experts here as well. So I will present the agenda. We will begin today with an opening speech from the European Commission, DG for Research and Innovation, Doris Schrecker. Followed by that, we have great speakers from Merge presenting their research on policies that contributes to sustainable and inclusive well-being. We have Tuuli Hirvilammi from Tampere University. We have Magali Prosio from Zoe Institute of Future Fit Economies. We have Professor Robert Costanza from Institute for Global Prosperity from University College of London. After these Merge speakers, we have a commentary speaker, Katja Perti from the European Commission, DG for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion, who will give a commentary speech from the policy perspective. Finally, we will have a look ahead in the Merge project by Andrea Ferranini from PIN Foundation. And then we will hopefully have enough time for a good open discussion, hearing from many of you participants today. So we are also recording the first part of the session, but then turning off the recording for the open dialogue. Still some housekeeping things to give you some rules on the Zoom. So please keep your mic on mute. And we'd all love to know who is here. So if you feel comfortable, also share your display name with your organization and name and introduce yourself in the chat. For questions, we would like you to use the questions and answers function in Zoom. You can find it in your bottom functions part. You can also use the chat, but the questions and answers function, we find the questions better. For any difficulties you have, please contact Jussi from Demos team, Jussi Asikainen at demoshelsinki.fi. But without further ado, I'm happy now to give the floor to Doris Schrecker, Head of Unit at the European Commission, Director General for Innovation, Industrial Research and Strategy and Coordination. Doris will today ground the discussion on the importance of research for prosperity and sustainable and inclusive well-being. Please, Ms. Schrecker, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very good afternoon to all around here. Thank you very much, Ella, for the introduction. Yes, indeed, I am here in the European Commission in DG Research and Innovation. We are very happy to be able to support this important project under Horizon Europe. And we have been also active in this field. So I must say that when it comes to sustainable and inclusive well-being here in our DG, and this project, this community is part of that, has started to work on beyond GDP, as we call it here internally, about 5 years ago. You may have seen online as well. We developed the Transition Performance Index at the time. That was the start of it. Commissioned study on beyond GDP metrics, and the latest one is the GDP +3 study, which you can also see on internet, or probably you know them as well. Together with our colleagues in the Joint Research Center, we have started the work on developing use cases for beyond GDP metrics in policy making, and they include social, environmental, and institutional dimensions of prosperity. I'm working here in the Directorate of Prosperity in DG Research and Innovation. So this element, the question you asked in the beginning, like what is it that we have in mind? What is the vision as well for a prosperous Europe, and the inclusiveness and well-being dimensions? That is quite a pertinent question. What I find interesting as well is really the essence, the objective of your workshop here today, because of course things start in research, but we have then an interest to explore how can that be translated in policy, how can we advance a beyond GDP area, in which way, and what do we get from that, and where are we in this. So this dialogue today should give us insights on an important question: where is the EU on this sustainable and inclusive well-being journey, also compared to other regions in the world? And how can these metrics, these indicators, be integrated more effectively into policymaking processes? The well-being of EU citizens is at the heart of the EU's mission as outlined in the treaty. The Union's aim is to promote peace, its values, and the well-being of its peoples, Article 3. So sustainable and inclusive well-being is not only crucial for our competitiveness vis-à-vis other regions of the world, it is essential for our prosperity and for intergenerational fairness. And we need to continue to keep in mind the long-term perspective, even when we are confronted with important challenges such as defense readiness, technological sovereignty, and economic security. The 2025 Strategic Foresight Report of the European Commission, which was published just a few weeks ago, has emphasized the need to ensure that our policies are not only focused on economic growth, but are also geared towards sustainability and well-being. It has emphasized the need for the Commission to strengthen cooperation with the OECD and the United Nations on the international efforts to develop beyond GDP frameworks, which build on the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. What we strive for are evidence-based policies, and we are aware and need to take into account also the challenges of getting data and have that coherent. An initiative like the MERGE project can, in this context, give an important input into our strategic reflection on policy tools, metrics, and models. And so I invite you all here around to contribute to this dialogue with your insights and how our aspirations for well-being and prosperity can be translated into concrete policies and actions which address the big challenges which humanity faces nowadays in a holistic way. I see you have a very, very interesting agenda with this very nice mixture between where we stand in knowledge and development and the research, and also some practical examples. So I wish you a very, very fruitful discussion in the time you have here together. And thank you on my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Doris, for this opening of the session. Next, we will hear the learnings from the researching and interacting around the sustainable and inclusive well-being in the MERGE project. So first, we have Tuuli Hirvilammi from Tampere University to present the MERGE work in finding policy instruments to support the sustainable inclusive well-being. Go ahead, Tuuli.
Thank you, Ella, and thank you, Doris Scheke, from your opening words. They were very insightful and inspiring to hear how much our work resonates with the EU policy objectives, even though it sometimes look different from when following the news. But it was very interesting to hear what's going on, and we are happy to collaborate very closely with many EU policymakers in MERGE projects in particular. And here I'm happy to present our policy instrument report to showcase how we have worked and what we have worked on this field on policy instrument as such. First, few words about MERGE. In this next slide, we bring together policy partners and research projects to together revolutionize how we measure societal progress, but we also want to build capacity for policymakers and also capacity among general public. So basically capacity among all of us here as well to be better equipped to address these grand challenges of our time and have a toolkit that can be used when advancing sustainable and inclusive policies for the future. And talking about the grand challenges, on the next slide, you see the donut, the recent from the recent publication by Andrew Fanning and Kate Raworth, who show that we need to stop immediately the overshoot of planetary boundaries and start pulling back almost twice as fast as we've been doing in recent years. And this is, of course, one of the greatest challenges for EU as well. And if you look at this slide, you see the comparison between the poorest 40% of the countries and richest 20% of the countries in the world. And it's clear that the rich 20% of the countries, which by the way make only up 15% of the world's population, so these countries, like we in Europe, we are behind over 40% of the environmental damage each year. So we totally overshoot the planetary boundaries, and meanwhile the poorest 40% of the countries still suffer from the societal shortfall or social shortfall in this case, so falling behind the social floor. And this is why we need a transformation towards sustainable and inclusive well-being. And in MERGE with this sustainable and inclusive well-being, we mean mainly just like a good life for all now and in the future. Ella, actually, if you press the next, you see that we want the transformation towards this kind of safe and just space for sustainable and inclusive well-being. And there is already a high consensus about this goal, as we heard, among policymakers, but also among civil society actors and researchers. So we know what needs to be done, but then the question there, the next the question here is indeed how to get there. And if we move to the next slide, we see that there are already different reviews published by scientists. We often hear there are no alternatives. However, this is not the case. There is actually abundance of policy proposals that have been suggested and developed by researchers. Here you see an example, a recent study by Fromberg and Lund. They conducted a systematic review and found more than 120 different policy proposals called as kind of eco-social policies, combining social and environmental objectives. And they categorize these under the 5 eco-social policy themes. So basically these are policies that aim to deepen democracy, transform income and employment policies, create more equal taxation, regulate consumption so that we reduce environmental harmful consumption in a socially just way. And these are also policies that should improve the social services to meet basic needs. And in addition to this review by Fromberg and Lund, we can look at the next slide, the systematic review of degrowth policy proposals conducted by Fitzpatrick, Parikh, and Cosme already some years back. And here they have mapped policies, and on as this kind of model of iceberg, if you look at the top of the iceberg, you see the core proposals. You see universal basic income, work time reduction, job guarantee, maximum income caps, deliberative forums, some cooperatives, etc. So these are the examples of degrowth proposals. And on the next slide, you see that also some policy advocacy partners have suggested their own kind of list of potential policies that could be used. Here, Wellbeing Economy Policy Design Guide includes this list of examples of wellbeing economy policies. You see similar policies here as well: work time reduction, universal basic income, job guarantee, taxes, also public procurement to support wellbeing economy activities. So here again, it seems that they somehow goes to the same towards the same direction. And last spring, you see on the next slide that the UN Special Reporter on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, Olivier de Schutter, launched this kind of call for a roadmap for eradicating poverty beyond growth. And the purpose there is to inform the UN Human Rights Council next summer with that kind of comprehensive catalog of policy measures. And we in Merge got information about this launch of this call, and we wanted to submit, as we were already supposed to compile a list or kind of short list of potential policy instruments towards sustainable and inclusive well-being. And therefore we started the kind of deliberative exercise among Merge partners, but also including some other researchers in this research community. And if you look at the next slide, you see what kind of selection criteria we had when we compiled the list. And we published this report last April. And in this exercise or experiment, we wanted to include policy instruments that promote sustainable and inclusive well-being. We also wanted to showcase and include policy instruments that can be implemented by public authorities at EU, national or regional level. So not too far out of box ideas totally, but something that could take place if we only decided to.
Tuuli, we can't hear you now, or can others?
Oh my.
Okay, now it fixed.
Maybe my internet got unstable. Sorry, it very rarely happens. Can you hear now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Then we move on. Sorry, hopefully it improves. My internet connection is breaking. And then the suggested policy instruments that have not been implemented at larger scale. And then we also included the policy instruments that have been included in the previous reviews. But yes, as a result of this, an outcome of this exercise, and in the report, you see the list of the graph of 19 policy proposals on the next slide, where you see that we have categorized them to six themes, more or less. And you see that, for example, we suggest universal basic services, basic income and care income to improve the access to social protection and services. We have written about labor policies and care economy, including job guarantee and working time reduction. In the report, you find our kind of justification why this is desirable, but also some evidence of existing or conducted experiments and some real life cases that we have found. Then we have economic systems transformation policies or policies towards this, including well-being budgets, responsible research and innovation policies, wealth tax, maximum income, high inheritance tax, credit guidance, and green and socially sustainable public procurements, and taxing luxuries with high footprint. And these for example, could then reduce the environmental harm as well, but also improve the social justice. And then we have next the climate policies that improve the climate and energy resources, and then also there are energy communities granting rights to nature, mandatory building isolation payments for ecosystem services, and then also some policies that aim to improve democratic governance, like participatory civil dialogues and future generations acts. And all these policies could be supported by the governance system that pay better attention to policy monitoring by using different sustainable and inclusive well-being indicators. So in addition to only implementing new policies, we have to move towards this integrated system that actually Robert Costanzo will talk more today as well. So this is our suggestion on policies in MERGE project, and as you see in the next slide, my main argument is really that the kind of scientific reviews are pointing towards the same direction. There is a kind of consolidation. We already saw the first draft of a roadmap for eradicating poverty beyond growth, and it includes many of these policy instruments that MERGE suggested, but also many policy instruments that, for example, we all or other policy advocacy partners, but also from Global South have suggested. So it will be a very comprehensive list and consolidating this work on policy proposals. So please do not believe if people say that there aren't alternatives. Alternatives do exist, and we have also done this synthesizing work. And if other people are asking you, what are the impacts of these policies? We don't know, of course, know yet, because they have not been implemented in practice in many places, and there aren't real life cases of maximum income or wealth tax, for example, or maybe so, but we can then say that there are some macroeconomic models that are already simulating the impacts, and they include biophysical and social indicators, and they are under progress, these models as well, and they can be then used to evaluate the effectiveness of these policies or different policy packages. And this is also something that we develop in MERGE and other projects. And to finish and conclude, I want to show you examples of policy databases or policy tool boxes that you can use to explore the policy alternatives. So for example, this Sustainable Prosperity Policy Database hosted by ZOE already include various policies, from quite broad to very concrete policy proposals connected to 3 different goals. Then there is already also very recent new Wellbeing Economy Toolbox that was published by another EU-funded project. You can explore policies there as well. And then if you want to learn more, you can also enroll the Wellbeing Economy Policy Design course, for example. So the information exists, and we are happy to also keep doing the work and advancing this field in MERGE. And happy to hear your comments and suggestions later on. But I stop here and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Tuuli. And let's continue with the sustainable and inclusive well-being indicators to enhance policymaking. We will hear Magali Brosio from ZOE Institute for Future Fit Economies, and she will present the learnings and reflections from our policy deep dive series and other policy-related events this year. The floor is yours, Magali.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ella, for that kind introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with you today to share a bit about the work that the ZOE team and also other partners are doing as part of the MERGE project, particularly in its policy stream. And today I'd like to offer some reflections on this exploration on how to use sustainable and inclusive indicators to support policymaking. So next slide, please. I like to start by setting a very simple but crucial kind of common ground, which is that supporting the well-being of all people on the planet today and in the future is, or at least should be, the goal that the ultimate goal we all strive for. And logically implementing very concrete policies that have a direct impact on people's well-being, like the ones that my colleague Tuuli just presented, is of course a crucial step, right, to achieving that goal. But sustainable and inclusive well-being is not only a way of identifying a subset of policies, it's also something broader. It's a lens that can really help us improve how we design, implement, and evaluate policies across the board. So from fiscal to monetary to social policies, all of these can play a role in supporting the well-being of current and future generation, and they can also at times undermine it. So how do we know really in which direction we're actually heading in? How can we know if the way we allocate our national budgets or design our pension systems or structure our tax brackets truly improves the well-being of people? How can we make sure that everyone's well-being is being supported, or that progress today doesn't come at the expense of future generation? And that's where sustainable and inclusive indicators come in, because they can really act as a compass that help us identify where we're doing well and where there's still room for improvement. But to do this properly, we need to take one more step. We don't need just indicators. We really need indicators that are embedded into governance frameworks, indicators that are actually used for decision making. And to explore this idea further, as part of the MERGE project, we carried out a series of policy deep dives at different governance levels. So together with policymakers, we look at how sustainable and inclusive well-being indicators could be integrated into policy files and initiatives. So very concrete and specific examples. And today I'd like to share with you some of the initial insights, learning, and challenges that emerged from our work at the EU level in a series of co-creative workshops that some of my amazing colleagues here at SOA Institute, also in collaboration with the European Policy Center, have carried out throughout this year. More specifically, I'd like to focus today in the ones that, in my opinion, offer particularly valuable lessons for our future work, not only at EU level, but also beyond. And before I do so, I also like to mention that these highlights are still a kind of work in progress. So we're still conducting actually these deep dives, and we still have a few coming up in the future still this year. So these findings are preliminary and not final, but yet I think it's worth to mention some of the things that have came up in some of these conversations. So for this work, we focus on 6 main policy areas, including the EU budget, competitiveness, social Europe, and governance. And for each of them, we explore a few concrete entry points to envision how the use of sustainable and inclusive well-being indicators could potentially support the implementation of said initiatives. And here are the main cross-cutting findings that came out of that work. Let me start by zooming in into 2 insights. So first is a shift in the policy paradigm. So there is a growing recognition that the move from beyond GDP towards sustainable and inclusive well-being needs a shift in policy paradigm. This shift requires more than just new indicators. It really requires embedding a long-term perspective in how we set and evaluate priorities. And also it calls for a more integrated approach to policymaking, really breaking silos between economic, social, and environmental agendas to pursue well-being as really a shared outcome that cuts across all of these areas. Then let's talk about moving from complexity to usability. So policymakers don't just need more data, they need really usable insights, tools like dashboards, scoreboards, outcome-based indicators that can really help translate complex trade-offs into clear, actionable guidance. This is how well-being metrics can really become politically usable by turning sometimes abstract concepts into concrete stories and very concrete policy choices. Concerning the learnings, I really want to focus on one that it's really precious for the work that we're doing here in MERGE, as you can probably tell by the title of this event itself, which is that science policy dialogue works. Having structured exchanges between researchers and policymakers really helps create this shared language that help us together turn very complex data and information into insights that connect with political realities, with public priorities, and so on. And this ongoing dialogue also strengthens relationships and mutual understanding, really allowing scientific evidence to inform not only what policies are for, but also how they are implemented. And when scientists and policymakers work together to co-design metrics, frameworks, and other tools, the result is that we have evidence that it's both rigorous and relevant, which is, I guess, the best of both worlds. Last but not least, we also need to acknowledge that there are some challenges along the way. So first, we heard repeatedly about some gaps in reliable data, especially for measuring outcomes. And I would also like to highlight the importance of keeping an eye on the consistency across frameworks. With so many different frameworks in the EU and also beyond, there is really a risk of fragmentation if well-being metrics are introduced ad hoc and not really through a coherent approach. So that's something that we should keep an eye on. Next slide, please. But despite the challenges, we do have many exciting windows of opportunities ahead of us. So I would like to encourage us to finish on a high note. These windows of opportunity exist not only at EU level, where we have opportunities to experiment and think about how sustainable and inclusive well-being metrics can really inform the implementations of initiatives linked to the 2024-2029 political guidelines, but also there are many exciting processes happening at the global level. And please allow me to highlight a couple of examples. So we have the roadmap for eradicating poverty beyond growth led by Olivier de Schutter that my colleague Tuuli mentioned just before. And in addition to that process, I'd like to highlight first the UN high-level expert group. So under the Pact of the Future, member states asked the UN Secretary General to establish an independent high-level expert group to advance the global Beyond GDP agenda. And in response to this request, the Secretary General appointed in May this year 14 members to this group, including scholars and practitioners from diverse backgrounds, regions and disciplines. And this group has a very concrete mandate to develop a concise dashboard that can allow us to track progress across different domains. This group is looking to share their findings and recommendations early next year, and an intergovernmental process will follow. And last but not least, we also have the Beyond GDP Alliance, led by Spain, the OECD, SEGIV, and UNCTAD. This alliance was launched in this summer at the Finance for Development Conference, and really seeks to unite countries and partners committed to integrated Beyond GDP metrics into financing policy and frameworks, fostering cross-regional dialogue and helping countries to share experience, set priorities, and leverage Beyond GDP metric at national and international level. So in this exciting context, of course, there are like two overarching challenges that remain. The first is how to ensure we select the right indicators, and I think my colleague will have a few ideas regarding that in the next presentation. And also, how do we keep frameworks developed across different governance levels and scopes aligned and consistent? And it is our hope that Merge, through its scientific and policy streams, really can contribute to this endeavor, helping to guide and inform these efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Magali. Let's continue with the last Merge speaker for now. Robert Costanza will continue from that with the perspectives of using science as a basis for the policy we design in this time of global crisis and beyond to ensure that we would live within the social and ecological and planetary boundaries. Floor is yours, Robert.
Okay, thank you, Magali and Tuuli, for those introductions. I'll follow up on what you were saying. Maybe next slide. Right. So there is a lot of emerging consensus, I think, on what we need both to pursue this agenda of sustainable and inclusive well-being. This is a paper that just came out that looked across a whole range of alternatives to the conventional economic approach, including the donut economics, ecological economics, well-being economics, etc., and found quite a bit of consensus. And these are the areas that I think there is broad agreement on that can support a new economy. The first one being taking a holistic approach, that recognizing that the economy is embedded in society and the rest of nature, that we need interdisciplinary and complexity thinking. From an ecological point of view, we need, limited substitutability of natural capital. We need, to stay within planetary boundaries. There are limits to growth. We need regenerative design. We need, from a social point of view, a more holistic perspective that includes the inclusive part of what we're talking about, equity and justice. And from a political economy point of view, we need to get beyond the conventional approach to capitalism and decolonization. We need deliberative democracy, as was already mentioned. We need relationality and social enfranchisement. So I think some of these topics and concepts already showed up in the policy recommendations that were being made. But I think we need to build a whole economics more engaged with those policies. Next slide. And from the merge point of view, I think it's important also that we recognize the necessity for integration of the metrics, the models, the policies, and toward the new goals that we're talking about. So we've been developing new metrics for decades. We've been developing models for decades, and we've been talking about these policies that were brought up for decades, but we've been doing them in isolation from each other, at least too much in isolation. And so in order to actually achieve the new societal goals that we're talking about of sustainable and inclusive well-being, we first need a societal consensus that is the goal. And I think it is there, but it's not as broadly shared perhaps as it needs to be. And there are some ways that we can increase that consensus about the social goal. But I think that really is there. But in order to achieve that, we need not just the new metrics, which I'll talk about in a second, but we need them connected with models that are more comprehensive, that look at the whole dynamics of the system. The conventional GDP approach, is based on a very specific kind of model that underlies the system of national accounts, a sort of the more static input-output kinds of models. And so that sort of guides the kinds of policies that are looked at, and that policy mix is one that supports GDP growth, that final goal. So if we want a new set of policies to be implemented, we need models that can actually incorporate those policies, that can actually incorporate the metrics that we're talking about, and that can link together the policies and the metrics, and can show how those policies will actually contribute to the societal goals that we've been talking about. So I think that's really the essence of what the Merge project is trying to do, is to merge these three elements. And we've certainly been working on all three of them. And maybe the next slide we can go to. And in particular, here's one study that we completed recently, where we looked at all of the alternatives to GDP that had been recommended, that had been proposed or implemented. And we initially found over 400 of these alternatives, and we narrowed it down to 213. So a lot of people have been thinking about and recognizing that we needed something different than GDP. But they've all come up with slightly different recommendations and haven't been talking to each other. We managed to implement some what's called semantic modeling to look at exactly how much similarity is there among all of these different alternatives. Is there a pattern that we can quantify in some way? So go to the next slide. And in fact, there are some interesting patterns there. These dots represent all of the different indicators that we looked at. And on the x-axis is how many components did they include in the indicator, and on the y-axis is how similar are they to all of the other indicators? How much similarity is there? And you can see that similarity goes up quite quickly as you increase the number of components, because they're able to capture many of the other elements, at least partly. And then it sort of tapers off. So there's diminishing returns to increasing the number of components and the complexity of the indicator. And there's a sweet spot at around 20 or so where, where you're getting the best bang for the buck, as it's sometimes said. And we pointed out in this diagram also some of the existing indicators that are out there and how well they do in this pattern. Canada's quality of life framework seems to do quite well at around 20 indicators. Others do quite well with more indicators. But we've transmitted this paper and had discussions about it with the high-level expert group that was just mentioned and a few of their members. And so they're and we've been going back and forth with them about looking at different levels of number of components. And I think this is what they're trying to get at, is where is the sweet spot? We can't have indicators, I think, with 160 or 180 different things that we're trying to measure. We need something that's more manageable, but also we don't want to go down to 1 or 2 or even 3. So what do we need to pick up the majority of what everyone in this broad group, has been saying needs to be included in some measurement of sustainable and inclusive well-being? Next slide. So the one that we've come up with from this study that represents, I think it came down to 19 different indicators across the human, social, built, and natural capital components of the system, looks something like this. And this is not intended to be the final list, but something that does represent the current synthesis of what's out there and can be used, I think, to build this broader consensus. And I think that's ultimately what we need, is to bring in all of these the stakeholders that contributed to this, and to get some fairly firm consensus on a list of what components need to be in this indicator. I think this list is fairly representative, but it can be modified a bit. Next slide. What else do we have here? Oh yeah, and I think the modeling integration is really important as well. And Dan O'Neill and others have been, as part of the Merge project, have been actively developing new models that do include the essential elements that we need. We need dynamic, nonlinear systems models that recognize that these 4 types of basic assets have limited substitutability. You need more than just capital and labor. You need natural capital. You need social capital. You need all of our institutions and et cetera. That our fundamental goal is sustainable and inclusive well-being, and that's partly a function of consumption of conventional goods and services, but it's also largely a function of other things that never go through the market system: our social relationships, our interactions with nature in a different way. We need different kinds of property rights regimes that recognize the importance of common property as well as individual and public property. So I think that integration and the kind of models that we need going forward will make a big difference. And these kinds of models will be able to incorporate the list of metrics that I talked about, and also we'll be able to look at the policy that have been recommended and project their impacts out into the future well enough to at least let us make a preliminary assessment of how well those policies will actually achieve the new goals that we're talking about. Is that my last slide? I think it is. I should mention that we have a comment coming out in Nature in this next month in November that covers a lot of this territory, and I think we'll get some attention for the Merge project in the policy communities around the world. And we've been interacting with this high-level expert group as well to help move that agenda forward. And as was mentioned, they'll come out with some recommendations later in the year that hopefully will incorporate some of the things that we've been talking about with them. Okay, thanks.
Great.
I think that's my last slide, right?
That's
Yeah.
it. Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Robert. And thank you again for all of our great merge speakers so far. We learned a lot on how to further utilize the research made on merge and other related initiatives as well, and how we could transform this evidence into action. At this point, I will remind all of you that you can already send your questions to the questions and answers function, and we will then go through them. At the end, we have a good time for open discussion. So keep thinking what questions you might want to present to our speakers. And for now, we continue with the agenda, and we have had Katja Berti from the European Commission DG for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion listening to these talks, and we would happily hear your thoughts and your comments on the topic with relation to your job at the Commission, focusing on the employment and social governance, and especially the European semester. So, Katja, how does the sustainable and inclusive well-being framework fit to your work in the Commission? Please, Katja, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot. I hope you hear me well. Okay, first of all, thanks a lot for the invite. It's I would define it a very refreshing experience. It's kind of inspiring. I liked very much the presentations that I was listening to. And indeed, I mean, it brings in an extremely interesting, new way of looking at things in a very integrated way, really bridging this silos approach to policies to have a way of looking at the social, the green, the economic in a very, very integrated way, which is, by the way, I always like defining this a bit the spirit of the European semester of economic and employment policy coordination. Now, how much we managed to achieve it at the current stage, that's another matter for discussion, but we really strive, to move precisely in this direction. I mean, the idea of the semester is precisely one in which you look, at policy interactions, everything that is of relevance under, of course, the legal remit of the semester, which is defined in the treaties, in principle should look at as an integrated process. That means fiscal policies, financial policies, but also environmental policies and climate policies these days, together with employment, skills, and social, and they are all part of the same policy coordination framework. So this whole idea of breaking silos that has been raised by many of you resonates very much with the whole concept of the European semester. This idea also of internalizing, in a way, trade-offs and complementarities is very much part of it, right? Of course, I mean, if one looks at the semester, you find in a way different analytical frameworks for different policy areas. There are the fiscal rules, there is the social scoreboard for the labor market and social side. There are the indicators in relation to climate. But of course, a synthesis is then the objective that we try to achieve in this process by looking at all these frameworks and indicators. They may be developed as separate frameworks, but that then are brought together into some kind of discussions within the country teams that analyze priorities and challenges per country, right? Exchange of views, internal brainstorming, that lead to a kind of synthesis of all these dimensions and an identification of what are the key priorities to pursue at country-specific level in the context of the analysis of challenges, but also, of course, the recommendations that are issued to the countries on the basis of those challenges. And of course, as you know very well, I would say another key point you mentioned is the importance of evidence for policymaking. That is, I would say, is the third feature of the European semester that links very much to what you are doing here. I do agree very much with you that there is a lot to gain from in terms of exchanges between the scientific world and the policymaking world, to make sure that the policies that we develop are based on good evidence and they are based also on good evaluation methods before and after the implementation of policies. I would mention a couple I hope you're not disturbed too much by the fact that we have some works in the building that are starting right now that you hear me, but let's see. I would mention a couple of work streams that are particularly important on our side that I think link very much to what you do. The first one is in relation to what the filière of the council that does employment and social policies calls social investment. I don't know how many of you have been following this, but this is very much a work stream that wants to link employment skills and social policies with other dimensions, and in particular economic growth, productivity. So it's one of those attempts to try and bridge, silos in between at least these two areas, what is labor market skills, social, and what is economic growth. The green is not into it, but it's the logic, I think, that matters, right? And that is very much in line with what you're trying to do here. In this respect, I mean, I appreciated a lot what a few speakers, I think Robert, for instance, in one of his slides presented all these very different dimensions in one go, right? I mean, so economic growth together with employment, together with green, that is precisely what this kind of work stream is trying to achieve, also from a quantitative point of view, right? So the idea would be really to have evaluation methods developed under this work on social investment that allow you to gauge all the different impacts of policies. So not only labor market and social outcomes, we are more familiar for discussing this type of work, gaining the gauging, let's say, the size of labor market and social effects of labor market and social policies. This is kind of traditional and familiar to us, but what we want to do is something more, which is also analyzing the impact on other policy spheres of those policies, right? So in this respect, EBSCO, I mean, the Council for Employment and Social Affairs did quite some work. You can see Council conclusions of June 2024 on these matters that really try to steer and inspire further work in that direction. And this, I think, could be of interest for what you're doing here, that goes even one step further and is an integration not only between economic, labor market, and social, but even the green brought into it. So I see a lot of cross-fertilization in these two work streams. And then the second one, I would of course recall the work that we do here in-house on statistics for labor market and social monitoring. The social scoreboard, as you know, I mean, I'm pretty sure all of you are familiar with it. It's kind of the central tool, the core tool on our side for preparing the analysis in the country reports and the country-specific recommendations on labor market and social policies. Lately, we have developed also the social convergence framework, for those of you that follow a bit more closely these matters, where the social scoreboard, again, is quite a core or a central tool. But the social scoreboard is just, I would say, the most visible part of it, if you want, and behind that you have what we call the joint assessment framework, which is basically hundreds of indicators in the labor market and social domain. Now, why I'm mentioning these? I'm mentioning these because these are basically living animals. I like calling them living animals. The Commission is continuously looking at developments around in terms of new data sources, new indicators development that can be brought into these frameworks. The beauty of these frameworks is that they are discussed and agreed with the member states. And that is also another very important moment to keep in mind. I mean, on our side, to be able to use the indicators in the European semester monitoring, we really rely on agreements with the member states and agreed metrics and indicators. But of course, to do so, I mean, we always fish outside. So research in that respect is always extremely inspiring and useful for us to see what else we can eventually bring into it. For the moment, for instance, I do believe that in our frameworks, the interactions between the green and the social and labor market is a bit underdeveloped. We are working on it with the member states in the committees, the employment committee, the indicators group of the employment committee. But I see that there is still a lot of ground to cover in that respect, because of course, to have indicators agreed by member states, there are some kind of criteria that are a bit of a must. You especially need to have a coverage of all 27 member states. You need as much as possible comparability so that we can compare how a certain country fares in versus the EU average of the other countries. You need statistical quality, of course. Everyone needs to buy into the quality of the indicator. So all these takes time to be developed. It takes also the development quite often of data collection to the purpose. But this is precisely where I believe the academic world and the research environment can really help the services moving forward in a way. Voila, I would stop here, but I really look forward to being kept in the loop of what you are further doing on all these. And I must say that until now, I have colleagues in the directorate that follow this more closely. I mean, it was not directly myself. But I find all these extremely useful, as I said, to inspire our work and to eventually bring some of these elements into the discussion with the member states in the committees, which is for us a must, to move then to the use of these statistics and indicators into the semester monitoring. Thanks a lot again for the invite.
Thanks a lot, Katja, for this reflection. And following from here, from what Katja said, and as well as all our merge speakers, how could we then in the future use these insights and this evidence to foster a stronger technical and policy consensus for the sustainable inclusive well-being, and what is merge doing to make that happen? And I will let our colleague Andrea Ferranini to talk a bit more about that. The floor is yours, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Ella. I'll try to be as quick as possible to allow enough time for interaction with our audience. So based on previous presentations, but then also based also on Katja's reaction, we just want to give you a quick idea on what's next in Merge, in terms of making even more concrete the whole work that Merge is doing in research, in co-creation, in discussion, so in keeping these living animals alive and together, and propose some concrete guidelines and guidance material for policymakers, for statisticians, for scholars like us. Our premise is based on previous reflections, is that we really need not simply to look at metrics or not simply to look at policies or to look at theories. We need to have a joint look at 4 kinds of consensus. So if we really want to promote a new narrative, metrics and policies centered on sustainable and inclusive well-being, we need to simultaneously deal with theoretical consensus in terms of the alignment between different schools of thought that are contributing to better measure and value what counts for well-being. We need to work on technical consensus in terms of advances and improvements in the technical design of composite indicators and dashboards. We need to work on the policy consensus in terms of the effective uptake of a new measurement system by policy actors in the design, in the monitoring, in the evaluation of policies. But then we can't forget to work all together on the public consensus through the engagement and scrutiny of all citizens and societal actors. So I think this is a premise also for our work in the next slide, from Merge in creating technical and policy guidelines for different target groups and different audiences. So our objectives, if you can go to the next slide, please. Our objective in this case is to make explicit and provide useful tools to understand what does a new sustainable inclusive well-being overarching goals implies for policy-making processes in concrete terms, or in other words, how to embed sustainable inclusive goals in processes to design, monitor, and evaluate policies. We are doing our best to exploit what could be the novelty of merge. So really to deal with interconnections among theories, models, metrics, and policies. So we're not only working through one perspective, we're working through different perspectives, and this is given by the richness not only of the consortium of merge partners, but the richness of the discussion with people like you today and in all our other meetings. And our value added in our work is try to engage with a wide network of actors and projects. So again, the real spirit of merge is merging the contribution coming out from the different living animals and to push, to spur for this theoretical, technical, and policy and public consensus. So for the next slide, I'll try to first highlight some starting points for our upcoming work on the guidelines. So first, we need to elaborate merge technical guidelines, so dealing most precisely with metrics, with measurement issues. In this case, our main audience, our primary audience, are going to be the National Statistical Institutes in EU countries. But at the same time, we have a second audience having in mind national banks, technical bodies that are supporting governments, Eurostat, but also the academic community that most often is using or proposing new ways of measuring sustainable and inclusive well-being. Next, please. So based on this audience, the preliminary structure of our content is dealing with two main blocks. First, what to measure. And here we have the great work presented by Bob and by his colleagues at UCL, emphasizing list of domains and then connecting with list of potential indicators. This also includes coming out from other merge activities, the pros and cons of different approaches. So we just don't want to give one straight way, one unique way, but to present how different ways can be complemented to each other. So how to work aloud around augmented GDP, ISCW, various composite indicators, the very important work done by JRC, who is also partnering Merge, with the multidimensional dashboard for sustainable inclusive well-being. And then, as mentioned by Magali, our interaction with the OECD WISE Center, our interaction with the UN high-level expert group beyond GDP. So we would like to propose in these guidelines also a way to have all these options in mind and in front of us and take decisions. And in terms of what to measure, also Tuuli was referring very strongly to the work that Merge, together with other projects, I have in mind MAPS, to be SPES at doing in pushing for ecological macroeconomic modeling for integrated policymaking. So our guidelines are supposed to focus on what to measure, domains, pros and cons and different approaches, and then ecological macroeconomic modeling. But then also we have the question on how to measure. So here we can't reinvent the wheel. We can't overlap or present again something that is already being presented in several guidelines. We want, for instance, to focus on what is new in Merge. I have in mind, for instance, the debate on comprehensive welfare measure. I have in mind the debates that Merge is facilitating with ONS from the UK on time use survey. So to give new hints and innovative hints on how to measure sustainable and inclusive well-being. This is for the technical guidelines, preliminary ideas that are open for discussion and feedback and suggestions on your side. But then we also have the Merge policy guidelines. In this case, our target audience, our main audience, are EU policymakers, including Commission and European Union bodies, and government officials at national level. But then also as a secondary audience, we are all interacting a lot with UN and OECD bodies, plus we have a big group of societal and advocacy actors represented within Merge, but also beyond Merge, that are interested in pushing for sustainable and inclusive well-being policies. And what's the main idea in terms of content in the next slide? Well, here I recall Tuuli's presentation on the policy repositories. So our ambition is to provide concrete inputs for a transition from mainstream policy model to a new policy approach. our starting point of policy guidelines is how we understand well-being. We need again to recall these. So our definition and domains and dimensions of sustainable inclusive well-being. What are the goals? And again, as a starting point, there is the ecological economics modeling. But then the core elements of these guidelines can be which policy instruments can take us to sustainable inclusive well-being goals. So to rethink, re-elaborate, and represent the policy instruments in a way that a policymaker can ask and think, okay, I want to move this target up or move this indicator down. What should I do? We provide a list of potential policy instruments. We provide suggestions on how to incorporate indicators for the monitoring, and especially suggestions on how to assess these policy instruments based on the dimensions of sustainable inclusive well-being that we mentioned before. I'll conclude by saying, again, these are preliminary ideas still open for discussion, that we are also imagining in the next slide how to disseminate and how to make sure that our guidance materials is used. So this is supposed to feed into a merged policy toolbox that has some concrete elements. First, is going to be embedded into the Sustainable Prosperity Platform run by Zoe and early presented again by Tuuli. We must, so it's not a desire, it's an obligation to exploit synergies and links with other existing platforms and tools. Again, there is a lot out there elaborated by our peer organizations. There is a lot done by JRC, by the OECD, by other partners. So we must link one to each other, also to give somehow a support to our readers, to our audiences, and on how to navigate through all the existing materials. And then again, to translate these guidelines into something which is a form of a training material to strengthen the capacity of statisticians, national and EU level policymakers, and civil society actors for our purposes. I'll stop here again by saying that any contribution on your sides is more than welcome to improve our ideas, to validate our ideas. Also, once we are out with our pilot material, if you want to test it, to have a look. So the more we merge our efforts, the more we contribute to the consensus, theoretical, technical policy, and public consensus, the better we can shape the future towards sustainable inclusive well-being, as mentioned in the treaty, as mentioned in the strategic foresight report. Thank you, and over to you, Ella.
Thank you, Andrea, for the great summary and seeing the next steps in Merge and beyond. Thanks again for all of our great speakers for grounding the discussion today. And now I would like to ask my colleagues from Demos to turn off the recording so that we can move on to the open discussion part.